Welcome to the module on the perfect active, middle, and passive indicative. This is the last indicative form that you'll learn before the midterm, and then after the midterm we'll be going over the non-indicative forms. Just by way of review, I've listed again the 6 principal parts that make up the Greek verb system. And remember that the whole goal in your memorization of Greek verb vocabulary is not only to memorize, for example, the lexical stem in luo, but to also memorize the verbal root, especially if the verbal root is different from the lexical stem, and to memorize the 6 principal parts for every verb. To memorize the present active stem, the future active stem, the aorist active stem. This week we'll be learning the perfect active stem, the perfect middle passive stem, and then the aorist passive stem. The reason why you have to know the 6 principal parts is because if, for example, you know the first principal part, the present active stem, the tenses that are formed from this stem are the present active middle passive and the perfect middle active middle passive. And the future active is the basis for the future active and middle, but not the passive. The future passive is based by the 6th principal part over here. The aorist active stem is the basis for the aorist active and the aorist middle. We will learn that the perfect active stem is the basis for the perfect active, and also an optional form that we'll introduce but you won't have to memorize, the pluperfect. And then the perfect middle passive stem is the basis for the perfect middle passive indicative, but also another optional form, the pluperfect middle passive, which again we'll introduce but you won't have to memorize. And so from these 6 principal parts, you should be able to form any verb in any form, because you memorize as part of vocabulary the stem for each of the tenses. So now let's introduce the perfect active indicative. The perfect active indicative, and again we're going to be using a paradigmatic verb luo, is formed by taking the stem lu, and then you're going to add a prefix to it. And this prefix is called reduplication, but the easiest and most regular way is to take the first letter of the stem, in this case it's lambda, and then to add an epsilon to it. And so if you look at this column here, le is the reduplication for luo, and so you add the reduplication plus the stem. And then for the perfect active indicative, it uses a tense formative ka, but it doesn't use any connecting vowels because the tense formative has a vowel built into it, and it uses the secondary active suffixes, but in a modified form. The way you would memorize the endings for the perfect active indicative is ka, kas, ke or ken with a movable nu, kame, kate, kasin or kasi. And sometimes you do see the form kan for the third person plural, but this is not the most frequent form. The most frequent form is kasi or kasin, and kan is what we call a defective form or ending, where it's being phased out of Koine Greek, but it hasn't been phased out completely yet. And so in the New Testament, you might see this suffix ending, kan, instead of kasi, but kasi is the more regular form. So let's put these forms together. If I want to say I have loosed, and that's what that's the translation for the perfect active indicative, I would write the form as, here's my reduplication le plus the stem lu and plus the tense formative plus suffix ending ka, and so le lu ka is I have loosed. You have loosed, singular, is le lu kas. He, she, it has loosed is le lu ke or ken. We have loosed is le luke kamen. You all have loosed is le luke kate. And they have loosed is lelukasi, or sin, but sometimes again you do see lelukan as a third person plural, and that's they have loosed. So let's say these forms for the first perfect active indicative. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Leluka, lelukas, leluken, lelukamen, lelukate, lelukasi, and also lelukan. There is a second perfect form. So remember that with the aorist, you have a first aorist, which is your kind of the most regular form for the aorist tense, but then you have a few irregularities with the second aorist form. In the same way, you have a first perfect form, which we just did with luo, but we also have a second perfect form, which is more rare than the second aorist. So you see this less frequently, and there's an easy way to learn the second perfect. It looks just like luo, except so it has a reduplication. You add the stem, but the only difference is instead of ka, kas, ke, or ken, etc., it drops the kappas. And so notice that the endings for the second perfect is not ka, kas, ke, but a, as, e or en, amen, ate, asin. And so let's put these words together. And so for the word grapho, which is I write, it likes using the second perfect form. So if I want to say I have written, it's ge grapha. You have written ge graphas. He, she, it has written ge graphe or fen. We all have written ge graphamen. You all have written ge graphete, and then they have written ge graphasi or sin. In this next slide, the most common second perfect forms are listed here. So we just did grapho, but akuo uses second perfect form. Lambano uses second perfect form. Gitamai uses second perfect form, and Urkamai. And the forms all written out here. There's also some random liquid verbs that do use the second aorist form, second perfect form, that is. And so we'll go over those when we introduce the special forms that develop for the liquid verbs. So how do we form the perfect middle passive indicative? And here I've listed the passive translations. But if I want to say not I have loosed, but I have been loosed passively, you have been loosed, he, she, it has been loosed. Or if I want to use the intensive middle, and I want to say I myself have loosed. The perfect middle passive indicative has the following forms. You take the reduplication of the stem, add the stem, and notice that it has no tense formatives and it has no connecting vowels. Instead, you simply add the primary middle passive suffix, and so that would be my, sai, tai, meta, sithe, nintai, and this is the one time where sai remains and doesn't disappear because there is no connecting vowel, and so the sigma, when it attaches itself to the stem, remains stable, and therefore we will see no change in the form as we did with other tenses. So let's go over the forms right now. So if I want to say I have been loosed or I myself have loosed, the form would be the reduplication, le, plus lu, the stem, plus the primary passive middle suffix, my. So le lu mai is I have been loosed. If I want to say you, singular, have been loosed, is le loosai. He, she, it has been loosed. Le, lu, tai. We have been loosed. Le, lu, metha. You all have been loosed. Le, lu, seste. And they have been loosed. Le, luntai. So let's say these forms again, all together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Lelumai, lelusai, lelutai, lelumata, leluste, leluntai.